A typical EPC report on a 1970s semi. 4 recommendations worth questioning. Let's talk about a scenario that comes up constantly with 1970s semi-detached homes in the UK. The EPC comes back, let's say D62, with 7 recommendations listed in order. The homeowner reads through them, assumes the list is a plan, and starts getting quotes. It isn't a plan. It's a modeled output, and for this type of property, some of those recommendations need questioning before you act on any of them. In this video, we're going to go through a typical EPC report for a 1970s cavity wall semi, the kind of report hundreds of thousands of UK homeowners are sitting on right now, and look at what the recommendations actually mean, which ones make sense, and which ones could cause problems if followed as written, what an EPC actually is and what it isn't. Before we look at the report, it's worth being clear about what an EPC is, because a lot of homeowners treat it as more authoritative than it actually is. An EPC is a modeled assessment. The assessor visits your home, records observable characteristics, wall type, roof type, window glazing, heating system, and feeds that data into a software model called SAP. The model produces a rating and a list of recommended improvements. What the assessor doesn't do: open walls, check whether existing cavity fill is intact, test for air leakage, or assess whether your specific building is suitable for each measure. The recommendations that come out are generated by the model based on your property type. They are not a site-specific survey. They don't account for your household's actual energy use, your heating habits, or your budget. That's not a criticism of EPC assessors. It's just what the tool is and isn't designed to do. The problem comes when homeowners treat it as a prescription rather than a starting point. Walking through the report, what it says. So let's look at what a typical D62 EPC on a 1970s cavity wall semi actually says. The recommendations usually come out in this kind of order, ranked by the model's cost-effectiveness calculation. 1. Solar photovoltaic panels. 2. Cavity wall insulation. 3. Loft insulation top-up. 4. Heating controls upgrade. 5. Solid wall insulation. 6. Heat pump. 7. Hot water cylinder insulation. At first glance, that looks like a reasonable list, but look more carefully and there are some significant problems. Solar PV is listed first. That's because the SAP model weights it highly for cost effectiveness. But solar PV on a home with an uninsulated loft and incomplete wall insulation is the wrong sequence. You're generating cheap electricity for a leaky building. And solid wall insulation, recommendation 5, is on the list for a cavity wall property. That isn't a measure that applies here at all. It's a data error or a model default for the property age band. Either way, if a homeowner acts on it without checking, they're going to have a very confusing conversation with an installer. Recommendation by recommendation, the insider's view. Let's go through each one properly. Loft insulation top-up. This should be first on the list, not third. It's the cheapest measure, the least disruptive, and it has a fast payback. If the existing insulation is below 270 millimeters, which is common in homes from this era, topping it up is the obvious starting point. Verdict: do this first. Cavity wall insulation. The measure itself is often right for this property type. 1970s cavity wall semis are generally good candidates, but the recommendation comes with no caveats about suitability. You need a proper cavity wall survey first. Is the cavity width adequate? Is there any existing fill? Is the property in an exposed location where wind-driven rain could cause moisture ingress? The EPC doesn't tell you any of that. Verdict: potentially correct, but verify before booking anyone. Solar PV. Not wrong as a long-term investment, but wrong at this stage of the retrofit. Install it after the fabric is sorted, and you'll size it correctly for a more efficient home. Install it now, and you're optimizing for a building that's about to change. Verdict: save this for later. Solid wall insulation. This property has cavity walls. This recommendation should not be on this report. If you're looking at your own EPC and you see this on a cavity wall home, contact your assessor and ask for a correction. Don't get quotes for it. Verdict: not applicable. Possible data error. Heat pump. The direction of travel is right. Moving away from gas is sensible for the long term. But a heat pump on a home that still has incomplete insulation is a problem. Heat pumps are sized to your home's heat loss. If you insulate after installation, the heat pump ends up oversized. It short cycles, runs inefficiently, and wears out faster. Insulation first, then heat pump. Verdict: Right measure, wrong timing. Hot water cylinder insulation. If this property has a cylinder, insulating it is one of the cheapest, easiest wins available. It regularly gets overlooked because it's unglamorous. Verdict? Yes. Do it early, costs almost nothing. What the right order actually looks like. So, what does the correct sequence look like for a home like this? Start with the fabric. Loft insulation top up to 270 millimeters. Cavity wall survey, and if the property is suitable, cavity fill. Draft proofing around doors, windows, and the floor perimeter if it's suspended timber. Hot water cylinder jacket if there's a cylinder. Heating controls if they're not already in place. At this point, you've reduced the building's heat loss significantly, and you've done it cheaply. Now you have accurate, improved figures to work with. Then you look at the heating system. With better fabric figures, you can get a heat pump properly sized to the improved building, which means a smaller unit, lower installation cost, and better running efficiency. If a grant is available at the time, it applies to a home that's actually ready for it. Solar PV comes last, sized correctly to a more efficient home that uses less energy overall. Notice that this sequence is almost the reverse of what the EPC listed. That's not because the EPC is useless, it's because it's a rating tool, not a retrofit plan. One more thing worth flagging: grant eligibility. Some schemes require improvements to be done in a specific order, or require certain fabric standards to be met before a heating system upgrade qualifies. If you're planning to use any government funding, check the sequencing requirements before you start. What to take from this if it's your EPC? If you're sitting on an EPC for a home from this era, here's what to take from this. The rating itself is useful. It tells you roughly where you are and gives you a benchmark. The recommended improvements are a starting point for research, not a shopping list. Before acting on any insulation recommendation, get a proper survey. For cavity walls specifically, the survey matters. A bad installation in a poorly suited property creates damp problems that are expensive to fix. If your EPC lists solid wall insulation for a property you know has cavity walls, that's worth querying. It happens more often than it should. And if a heat pump appears on your list, treat it as a signal about the direction to head, not something to book before the fabric is sorted. The insider's perspective on this is simple. A building is a system. Every measure you do affects the others. The order matters, the details matter, and a list generated by a model doesn't replace thinking about your specific home. And keep in mind that every home is different. The principles here are general guidance, and for your specific situation, it's always worth getting a professional assessment. If you want to work through this for your own home properly, check our EPC Action Plan. It gives you a structured, step-by-step guide based on your EPC band and property type. It's not a substitute for a full retrofit assessment, but it will tell you what questions to ask and what order to ask them in. Link is below. And if you're earlier in the process and just want to understand what your EPC is actually telling you, grab the free checklist first. That's also in the description.